corner of these big crates, and they start carrying these things back up that steep stairway to the transport helicopter that's outside, and then they depart the city of Baghdad with those containers containing whatever in the world it was they had. I'm sitting here, I was literally flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I realized at that moment that whatever else the U.S. military was doing in Iraq, Babylon, whatever else they were doing, the minute they arrived in the plains of Shinar, they went straight to a top-secret room beneath the Babylon Museum. The people at the Babylon Museum, if they're listening to this program, they know what I'm saying is absolutely the truth, where Saddam Hussein had hidden objects of evidently national interest that had been dug up from the ancient world. They removed those containers in which something the American government wanted, something from ancient Babylon, had been found. Now, what it was, I have no idea because they didn't take it out of the box. But I could tell you it took like 4 strong soldiers standing on all 4 corners of these crates to carry them up out of that steep staircase, put them on a U.S. military transport vehicle, and flew out of town with them, and they took several of them out of there. And what's amazing is they didn't act like they even cared about these irreplaceable golden masks and jewels of ancient kings and queens that would have been absolutely irreplaceable, absolutely without monetary value. I mean, these things would have been worth literally tens of millions of dollars or whatever they'd have been worth. They didn't care nothing about that. Whatever was in those boxes, they took them. So I go to bed. I have intentions of getting up the next morning and going through the rest of the images, which were probably not the ones that were all that important anyway, because I walked through all of the images I cared about. But when I woke up the next morning, my password was expired. The curator would not respond to any of my emails. But I got to tell you that I found out for myself that there was definitely something there. So what was it? Was it ancient portal technology? Did the U.S. move it to an undisclosed location? Yeah, they did that, whatever it was. But did they do that so that it would be in the hands of a future world leader? I just absolutely have no idea. And from that day forward...
Well, hey, Tom. Yep, Tom, I might be able to fill in the blanks on that. And now, for the record, ladies and gentlemen, I did not hear Tom on Coast to Coast. I did not talk to him about this. This is the first time I've ever heard this. But during that time, again, I was in contact, and they contacted me because evidently something, and only they can tell you why, but the point being is that they got what they were looking for. And the general told me this. He said, Steve, we wanted 2 things, and we got it. We got it before anybody else got to it, okay? He told me, and these are the guys that operate beyond the regular military. They're beyond the NSA. They're beyond a lot of things, okay? But they wanted 2 things, Tom, and this is, you don't know, so I'll fill in the blank there. According to active duty 4-star, the point is they got the DNA that they're looking for, but they also got the control mechanism and the power source to basically activate what most people have come to know as the Tower of Babel. God destroyed it, obviously, but the point is by confounding their language. But that which Saddam Hussein had was the primary reason that we went into Iraq. The ancient technology, and God bless all of you who are listening to this that have cosmic and magic clearance, the technology, the DNA. And when I say DNA, I'm not just talking about, DNA of the entities that they can reconstitute, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about the formulas that you've referred to so many times in quoting the passage in concerning Nimrod, that he began to become a Gibborim. So I can only tell you, Tom, according to the sources I had, and they contacted me, and again, I want to share something real quick, and I'll turn it right back. The people that contact me for one reason. They say that because I've been telling people the truth. That may not go well with my critics. When I can check out a certain general through different ways, or a couple generals, and people say, well, you can't possibly know those guys. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I do. And so even from in the military community, now I'm not bragging, but what I'm saying, Look at tonight. I have never talked to you, Tom Horn, about this incident. You have never talked to me about this incident. Yet tonight we're putting, two and two together. And see, it's kind of like, I would say this, it's a binary binding of truth for a single purpose, a single focus. If they've got that, they've got the technology of the ancients. You know how the Pentagon refers to these guys? He calls them the gods of the Sumerians, okay? The gods, little g's. So the point is that the fallen angel technology, the fallen angel power sources, this is what the illuminated ones, the globalists, if you will, seek to, number one, control the world with, but they actually believe they can make war against God. So knowing that, the point is that it puts the whole battle of Armageddon, it puts the whole battle in the heavenlies, where the book of Revelation talks about the devil and his angels fighting against God and his angels, and they get kicked out of heaven. This is, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard Tom Horn lay out to you is another one of those seminal points, the seminal point in history, because there is no way we talked about this before the living God. There is no way I knew what he knew or saw what he saw, yet those things dovetail. So, Tom, I think that's fascinating. Let me give you another example. A guy named Brett, I sent this to you, Tom Horn. Brett, God bless you for listening. He sent me a book by Suetonius, and Chris, you're going to find this interesting. It's called The 12 Caesars, and it talked about Nero's craziness, and I'm quoting from page 236. I had never seen this in all the decades of research. He said this, Nero was eager, it is said, to get hold of a certain Egyptian, a sort of ogre who would eat raw flesh and practically anything else he was given. And Nero loved watching this ogre, a giant, flesh-eating giant, tear live men to pieces and then devour them. Kind of sounds like Tom Horn, Chris Putnam's trip to the Midwest, to the desert Southwest, doesn't it?
Okay, just on the concept of the ogre and Nero in the desert, or I wasn't sure where you wanted me to go with that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I uncovered, you see a lot of criticism of these ideas that Tom and you guys and we are throwing out all together, especially about these beings, but they're absolutely biblical. When you look in these chapters in Isaiah that are about the day of the Lord and the sorts of things that are going to go on, in the original languages, it's not even controversial that it's talking about, if you look in the Septuagint version of the Bible, it very clearly says that giants are coming to execute my wrath. Now, I don't think that a Jew living 100 years before the birth of Jesus would have even thought that was controversial. They just kind of accepted that sort of thing. But it also talks about, satyrs or half goat, half human, hybrid beings that'll be dancing around, during the destruction of Babylon. But this is really very clearly pointing to the day of the Lord, to the end times, not an event that's ever happened before in history. So, no matter, how people want to interpret those passages, they cannot accuse us of being unbiblical by talking about them. They might not like the way that we tie them to current events. They might not like the way we take it quite literally, but it is very much biblical. And, there's, their interpretation is their interpretation. If they want to turn it into some sort of symbolic language that has no tangible meaning, that is, something they can choose to do. But I take it very seriously, and I think people should, be watching for these sorts of things. And I think that, recent events support that they're actually happening, and it's foolish to ignore it. So that's really the perspective that we're putting out here. And so the fact that, you're releasing a book about, the gates of hell being opened and creatures coming over, I think it is a warning to the church. Your kids are out there joining ghost hunting societies and occult clubs, going and trying to bring up spirits using electronics, trying to capture their voices, using little machines and stuff on television to try to detect ghosts. This is what the children in America are doing right now, the stuff that the Bible warns against very specifically and says that, you put yourself under the influence of demons by doing this stuff. So the fact that we're talking about this stuff and warning people about it, we need to even say it louder, and I don't care about what the critics think. We really need to wake people up because this is happening. The paradigm is shifting. The world is changing. The culture is becoming more in your face, and the fact that the atheism movement is dying because people are seeing all this spiritual movement, and it's time for the church to wake up and start addressing this stuff. And I'm just really honored to be in a place with you and Tom where we can function in that role.
Absolutely. And hey, Steve, if I can, what Chris is talking about with the kids are out there right now, and they're being lured into learning how to open their own gates. It's fun, right? Get some electronic equipment and go ghost hunting and open a doorway and communicate with spirits. And then you mentioning that Nero, did you say Nero? Anyway, has an ogre.
Yes, Nero. Yep.
And he's got this ogre, and he likes watching him be cannibalistic.
Tearing people literally live apart in front of him and then eating them, and that really caused, I guess, some perverted response in Nero, but that was his favorite thing. And again, you see, Tom, I didn't know Brett. Brett is one of our listeners, and God bless you, Brett. The bottom line is he sends me this, I think today, okay, when I forwarded it to you today, and the point being is it ties in exactly with what Dr. Mose told you, did it not? I mean, will you share, because this is something that, I'm sorry, I'm excited now. Will you share what, I get really, this is like candy for me, ear candy. The point being is that again, I started the show with saying that classic archaeology, classic, historians just denied cannibalism in the desert Southwest, blah, blah, blah. And now you hear the story about literally men being torn apart, and you're hearing this from Native Americans. By the way, Native Americans know who tells the truth and who doesn't. Just look at the history of the United States government and the way they've treated them, I mean, I'm sorry, but, I'm blunt. The point being is that this is will you share that? Because I think here's what I'm trying to get people to understand. The thing is that we've already been prepared to be turned into a food source, Soylent Green, the Twilight Zone to serve man, the Outer Limits episodes, this thing is predictable in the genre of cinema. Chris is talking about kids. Look at the goths. Look at the vampirism, drinking blood. Look at the combination, of humans, perverted sexuality and its association with death. So the point being is that when you're in the desert Southwest and you're hearing this, and again, I'm going back even deeper into ancient history due to the Woods document that's in my new book, or the revision of Genesis 6, the second volume, which has got 165 new photos. I'm telling you that there's a reason. There's a reason. It's fascinating. Chris Putnam, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn are right back at the Tower of Babel, or Babel. Some people pronounce it one way, some pronounce it the other. But the point is that now there's nothing new under the sun, Chris Putnam. We're there, that which was is going to be again. So, Tom, share the cannibalism thing. The reason I'm focusing on this is because it's critical, and it explains what happens to civilizations that embrace this. Literally, they're not good to the very last man. They devour each other to the very last man, who then ultimately.
Here's the thing. We go to Mount Graham, we come down off Mount Graham, we get this information from the Anasazi, we realize that there's something more here that we haven't thoroughly investigated. You know, we're Americans. We grew up in this country, and all of a sudden our eyes are being opened to information about the ancient American history that we are unfamiliar with. And so we decide to investigate it. So while Chris is just returning from Sedona, Arizona, and capturing film of light beings that are coming out of a portal, essentially warning him not to come any closer, I think, and being buzzed by V-shaped craft, I'm getting in a rig, heading out with a film crew for the four corners of the United States. Now, we go into all of the details about that in the book, On the Path of the Immortals, so I won't take time to tell it all, but here's this one part you're asking me to tell you. We had tried to get authorities from within the Native American nations, whether it be Apache, Hopi, Navajo, whatever, to sit down with us. When we're talking elders, people who are leaders in the nations, and they're very suspicious. They don't like to talk to white people because, you know, we too many times New Agers have taken their information and then went out and misused it. And so they're very suspicious. So we were working a year and a half, trying. Finally, bottom line is we get to sit down with the third generation, the Navajo Nation's medicine man. He's an academic. He's written books that they use in their universities and schools. And we meet him actually on the campus of the school. We go into a traditional hogan, and we didn't tell him we was going to film him. And when we get there, he's willing to meet with us. We go inside the hogan. Our cameraman comes in. He sees the camera. He doesn't like the camera, but he doesn't stop us. And so we actually filmed 3 hours of Dr. Don Mose, he's a famous person in the Navajo Nation. And one of the books, I don't know if I showed it to you when you were here, but one of the books that he wrote, he had an artist depict some of the giants that were alive and that the Indians had to fight against, cannibalistic giants here in the U.S. in early times. But anyway, we sat down, and here's the point I want to make. He starts telling us, because I asked him, tell me, what happened to the Anasazi? This is a giant mystery. Where did these pre-Pueblo Indians that built these magnificent cliff dwellings in the Four Corners area of the United States, where did they go? They disappeared literally overnight. Nobody knows where they went, and the universities admit that. Now they have theories, and they say that, you know, there could have been like a drought, and so they migrated away. And so I asked him to tell me what happened to the Anasazi. And so we sit down, and he starts giving me the traditional story that they might tell to, you know, any other white person about a 7-year drought. They migrated away. They eventually became a different people, maybe the Hopi, whatever. And so he's talking, and I stopped him. And I said, now, I understand there's really a lot of evidence that suggests that that's not what happened with the Anasazi, that something else happened. And we've got this on film. So I asked him, what happened to the Anasazi? He says, he starts telling the story. And when I question it, he stops. And this is the part, Steve, that got me. He looks right into the camera, and people will see this. And he says, and he smiles, actually. And he says, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but, and I have no idea why this man went off record and told this story, but for the next hour, he tells us a different story. He says, if you would have asked my great-grandfather, who was also a Navajo Nation medicine man, here's the story that he would have told. And brother, he starts describing a moment in early American history where a portal opens in the Four Corners area of the United States of America, and a reptilian, a deceiver, comes through the portal. Same story, almost identical to what the Apache talk about. And he starts deceiving the people. He starts teaching them sorcery, magical incantations. They go inside their kivas. They start practicing pharmakia. They open doorways. Giants come through and start cannibalizing, eating the people, teaching the people who are with them. They get like, here's the crazy part of this, Steve. They get like some of the Anasazi that are willing to be their guides, right, because they're trying to survive, to help them track down where other Anasazi are so they can eat them. They become cannibalistic. Now, here's something I want to tell you. This investigation continues right up until this very moment. I haven't stopped. Allie Anderson, who's a private investigator that works for me full-time, came on staff this last year, and I told her, I want to know the deepest parts. I don't want to stop just because a book's written. I want to know the deepest parts of the storyline. She just yesterday gave me a 50-page report that is, it's just absolutely unbelievable. It is literally evidence at the university level here in the United States of Nephilim, probably human breeding, if you will, or raping Anasazi and the offspring. Now listen, this 50-page report is based on archaeological digs that universities here in the United States conducted under the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center of Excavations in southwestern Colorado. Some of this information is actually available online. You could read it online. If you read it, here's what you'll find. You'll find out that they found, in their excavations, they found locations where the Anasazi were literally ripped to shreds. Now, I'm not talking about somebody got killed, beaten in the head with a hammer, and burned in a fire and ate. I mean literally the flesh and bone is ripped to shreds, as if they had been torn apart, Steve, like this ogre you was talking about a moment ago. This is in the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center excavation, southwestern Colorado, university-level excavations that were done here in the U.S. Secondly, they found where the bones of some of those who had been ripped to shreds were scattered over a very large region, as if something had torn them up, almost, it sounds terrible, almost like packing them for food, almost like carrying them like they're you know, like the Indians would, you know, make jerky or something and carry that over long distances, because the bones of an individual would be found many, many miles away, another bone that relates to that individual. Thirdly, and this is where it gets really weird, they uncovered remains of what they're calling Anasazi Indians, but they're larger than all of the other Anasazi Indians. They have mutated mandibles. They have sharp teeth, almost like an animal, and they have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And immediately when I'm reading this report, that again is done at the university level here in the U.S., having to do with excavations among the Anasazi, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this sounds so much like the Middle East. These women were literally raped by the Nephilim, if you will. They gave birth to Gibborim. This is the story it tells in the Middle East, but now we're talking about here in the United States. And these date to exactly the same period in time that the Old Testament Bible tells us this was happening over there. So,
hey, yeah, I could add just a detail to that. I mean, one of the reasons that we can be really confident that there was cannibalism going on is that archaeologists have absolutely discovered petrified human dung, human waste. But within that human waste, they found that there was human DNA, which pretty decisively shows that they were eating humans. So the story about the reptilian coming through the portal actually starts to take on more weight, considering the archaeological evidence actually supports it better than the story that they just kind of dispersed and became other tribes.
Absolutely. So bottom line is that's the 2.5-hour DVD that we're giving away with the book. That's what people are going to find out about. That we found evidence that was not just somebody's opinion. It's not just an old Indian somewhere that wants to tell us stories. These are academics. They're very well respected. Their works, their books are used inside the indigenous schools, Navajo, Hopi, and so on schools. And they're oral historians, so they pass this down orally. In fact, it's very interesting being in a Hogan and having a third-generation medicine man tell us these stories. And in fact, he told us that when the missionaries came to the United States, the first missionaries, the Mexican invaders and so on, came here and started telling the indigenous people their stories to try to convert them to Christianity. Many did convert to Christianity. But he said, our forefathers told him, we already know these stories. We already know that God created, that a reptilian fell, came to the earth, deceived mankind, giant cannibalistic beings came onto the surface of the earth, God wiped them out in a flood, and after the flood they came back not in the same numbers as they were before. He said, we already know this to be true. We lived it. It happened here at the same time that it was happening in the Middle East. And so that was the extraordinary thing that we found. But, of course, now the question is, they came once. There's universal evidence that it did, in fact, happen. But now the question becomes, is it going to happen again? And that's the part that actually ties into biblical prophecy, end times prophecy. And that's what we try to do in this new investigation on the path of the immortals. And Chris did some research in there that is absolutely some of my absolute favorite stuff I've read in a very, very long time, where he talks about the fiery flying seraphim. And I don't know that we'll talk about that tonight, but just so people will know, when they get the book and they talk, and you see the biblical evidence, the Hebrew evidence, even the Dead Sea Scrolls that also describe these creatures that came through as having a reptilian presence. The fact that is corroborated in scholarly works is just wonderful. It's fabulous.
I think it's critical that people understand that, again, this is what I wish, forgive me, this is what I pray people will do, that they will learn to basically listen, take everything to the Lord in prayer. But when you, Tom, when you, Chris, when I or others are writing these books, and we spend the time to